Welcome back to Philosophy 1101, Problems of Philosophy at the University of Connecticut. This week we will be discussing freedom of will. And as we do so, we want to distinguish between two different notions or dimensions of the idea of freedom. And contemporary terminology often confuses these, so I want to try to separate them, and then we'll try to warn you, flag, when I'm using the term in one way as opposed to another. On the way I want to use the terminology, freedom of action is what we most often mean by freedom of will in everyday parlance. Freedom of action is a matter of performing an action in such a way that you could have done otherwise. Here I am with my index finger, and I feel that I'm free to decide whether or not to wiggle it one way or the other, up or down, backwards or forwards, as the case may be. Intuitively, phenomenologically, it seems like I've got complete control over what my finger does, which action I perform with regard to the wiggling of my finger. Whereas, if we define the will as that set of desires that are, generally speaking, efficacious in producing actions, where, for example, thinking back to Ryle, from a Rylean perspective, one's will is going to be that set of dispositions to action that will result in your acting angrily under certain circumstances, in your clowning cleverly under many circumstances, in your being a good appreciator of certain types of movies or certain types of fiction. You prefer one type of ice cream over another. You dislike a certain kind of sport. All those things taken together, let's define as your will. With that understood, then we can say that freedom of will is a matter of having the will that you choose to have. That is, doing something or other that can result in your modifying the will, or if not, then at least sticking with the will that you choose to have if you already are satisfied with the will that you've got. But in many cases, you might find you want to modify your will in such way as to be less of a procrastinator, more of a patient person, more sensitive to others' needs, more empathetic, etc. Maybe developing interests and likings for tastes in certain activities that for now you might not find very attractive, but maybe because of friends of yours tell you that they're attractive, you think there's a chance that it's worth giving it a try. All those changes that it might be possible to bring about in yourself, I'm going to describe as, if you can make those changes, then those will be exercises of freedom of will. However, the majority of philosophical discussion has been under the topic of freedom of action. Just to warn you about confusion, nevertheless, that is usually referred to as freedom of will, although the more proper terminology should be freedom of action. And just in order to fall in with the step of the majority of discussions here, I'll normally be using the term freedom of will to talk about freedom of action, just to make things a bit more confusing for now, but I think it'll be consistent with literature that we'll find, that we'll be coming across. So just keep in mind, though, that freedom of action, in the way that I'm using the terminology here, and freedom of will are distinct notions.